thanks again for the opportunity to present. And we are thrilled to be part of this discussion and, as I say, create a placemat for you today because we are, as a consulting firm, dependent upon data in everything that we do. And a lot of times, our biggest challenge is finding the right data or helping people understand how to connect the pieces of data to make good decisions. And what we primarily do is market analysis, financial analysis, and investment analysis, and the quality of data affects our conclusions. So the classic garbage in, garbage out. So we're always wanting to make sure that what we put into our financial models and our business models and our policy decisions is based upon sound data. So when Derek said, can you help us create the story and set the placemat for a broader data decision, we were super excited. So what I've got in front of you here is a two-sided document. I'm going to be pretty low-tech here. We're going to use the front part primarily. And the front part, which is the schematic here, is what I'm going to take you through. And this kind of talks about, from at least our perspective, how we see the data pieces fitting together for a global picture to improve and enhance visitor services in the federal space. On the back is what we talk about in regards to what the data is, why the data is important, and some of the places to gather the data from. Now, obviously we can improve and enhance this because we're always improving, and there's probably some data sources I haven't thought about or we haven't thought about on the back here. And I think this is really a good way to use this as a starting point for our discussions. So what I really want to do is take you on a journey through this circle of data and talk to you a little bit about the pieces of it and why we think they're important so we can have a broader discussion of it. So I'm going to start with the little asterisk on the green thing here talking about visitor profile. At the end of the day, while you as public agencies have responsibilities for stewarding land and the settings, whether it's the water or the mountains or the trails, we're in the business of stewarding the land for, in many cases, if you look at your mission, for the visitor enjoyment on the land. So the first thing we got to do is understand who are our visitors today and what is our nation looking like as far as a visitor market in the future. So at a minimum, that US Census stuff that we do every 10 years is pretty important. It provides us age breakdown, it provides us ethnic breakdowns, it provides us income, it provides its insight to income expenditures. The other piece of data that we typically look at is the Bureau of Economic Analysis, because the Bureau of Economic Analysis provides us insight on how much money is sitting in somebody's pocket that they may be able to take and spend on a car, a boat, a RV, a snowmobile, new recreation, just about any sort of thing that's happening on public land. And I really got a sense of the importance of this when we were doing some work for presenting actually to a marina management company, and they wanted me to talk about trends in boating. And one of the things I did is I looked at some Bureau of Economic Analysis, and I looked at like a 15-year trend of personal expenditures. And if you think about it, 20 years ago, that $150 a month cell phone bill that you have now, or maybe 50 or 200, you didn't have. And so if you think about personal expenditures and what's coming out of somebody's pocket now versus 10 or 15 years ago, it's important for you to understand what is left or what is available for someone to use and spend on recreation items. The other issue that we think about when we do our analysis, and obviously agencies need to be thinking about, is planning and focusing for recreation experiences is place-based. And so understanding the economic profile and the ethnic profile of the communities that are adjacent to, or if you have an international base, far away, is important to understand also. And the great news is census data and Bureau of Economic Affairs data can be sliced and diced 10 ways to Sunday. So what we also have seen in the last decade is the way the data is available to the public agencies or the citizen is much more dynamic, which means it's easier to manipulate to make good decisions. So once you know about the people who are potentially going to come out to your opportunity, the next thing you need to understand is what's the market doing? And we typically find that the market is many times ahead of the agencies in regards to understanding consumer needs. So we're going to have several representatives of the market here, NMMBA and RBIA and OIA, talk a little bit about the different sort of studies that they provide on what are the trends in regards to the size of an OHV, what's going on with side-by-sides versus four-wheelers, what's going on with sailboats versus stand-up paddleboards, what's going on with different types of RV equipment. And we are constantly sensing and searching for and using the data from the industry in order to inform our recreation planning decisions. And so, you know, you'll see on the back here, but of the cycle that I gave you, that if we're not looking at the data from the industry as a public agency, we really aren't kind of doing the full stewardship responsibility that you should be, because you're not really planning for the future of your customers. And there's a natural challenge there because the industry is, as I said before, typically leading the market. And so it's incumbent upon public agencies to be looking at that data. And that data typically can be looked at from a trend line, and should be looking at a trend line. Because quite frankly, seeing equipment that is no longer being needed or seeing increases in equipment types that is expanding are things that agencies should be responding to. So once we know who our visitors are, once we know what they're interested in purchasing and how often they're purchasing it, the next big thing we need to understand is where are they enjoying their recreation? And that's really the setting box. And the issue here is understanding what is our supply of recreational experiences and what is the condition of the facilities or the landscape in which those recreational experiences are occurring. So understanding our trail inventory, motorized, non-motorized. What is the condition of those trail systems? Understanding boating access. How is our boating access? Where is our boating access? Understanding the campground inventory. What type of campsites do we have? So this is where folks like the rec.gov inventory database can be useful. Individual organizations who have been accumulators of data on the trail systems is data that we use. Each public agency has a responsibility for inventorying their assets as part of their stewardship responsibility. That's another source of data that we look at. And then when it comes to the condition side, we're big believers in understanding the quality and condition of the assets, whether it be a built environment or a natural environment. And the agencies are at different points in having facility condition assessments done on their assets. But if we're not kind of looking at that, we're really not creating a full picture of how long that trail or that boat ramp or that restroom or whatever is going to last so that the next consumer can come in and use it. So settings are very important, and making sure we understand that is the next part. The next part comes to really to providers, because once we know who our customers are, what they're using, where they're using it, we need to start measuring how often they're using it. And this is really where both the public sector and the private sector come into existence as far as data sources. Each of the federal agencies, and we've got obviously folks like Don here, are doing visitation counts, whether it's annual, whether it's every 5 years. How they get it done and the process they use for updating it varies by agency. We have, you know, the National Visitor Use Monitoring for the Forest Service. We have the Public Use Statistics Office for the Park Service. We have the Recreation Management Information System for BLM. We have VERS for the Corps. And each of those systems count visitation. And each of those agencies have their challenges with that data. Some it's an issue of the frequency in which they collect it. Some of it has to do with the integrity of the data when they collect it. But that data right now is really a cornerstone of a lot of discussions and decisions that agencies have with their stakeholders. And we look at it, and in some cases we embrace it wholeheartedly, and in other cases we have to figure out if it's accurate enough to make a really good decision off. And I can honestly tell you that probably about 25% of the time with some of the agencies, we totally disregard the visitation data that the agency's given us because it's not of the data quality that we really need to make good decisions. Now, an interesting opportunity that's available that's not always availed, which is really the data that your private partners have, whether it's the concessionaire in a park or a permit holder in a forest. Most of the permits and the arrangements that we've seen with these partners include the requirement for data reporting, both on usage as well as revenue. But a lot of the time, that data is in a file, in a cabinet, or in a computer file on a server. And a lot of times people are not doing anything with it. And yet, it is probably one of the most valuable pieces of information because it's taken on an annual basis and it's based upon a transaction of money, which typically people want to account for accurately. So what we end up usually having to do is spend a lot of time searching into the files of the agency, getting the information about their agency partners so we can use that data to make good decisions. And so the good news in that side is that your relationships with your third-party partners requires that you collect the data. The not so good news is that you're not really using that data in a robust way. And the reason that's important is because typically you are paid off a percentage of revenue in those relationships. And if you were tracking that data, you would have a really good understanding on a monthly, quarterly, or an annually basis what's going on with your non-appropriated funds. So we cannot foot stomp, whatever you want to call it, jump up and down, whatever, enough about the importance of those partners' data in being able to make good decisions. So once you know what's going on from a trend data, or rather visitation up or down, usage up or down, the next thing is, okay, so they're on your land, they're spending their money, your trails are in good condition, but are they having a good time? Are they having a positive experience? Are they having a negative experience? Are they coming back? Is their average length of stay getting longer? Is it getting shorter? And so this is a whole other part of the data set that should be looked at. Now, several of the public agencies have visitor satisfaction built into their surveys, which is good. And most of the private sector partners, most of their contracts require some sort of visitor feedback loop. And again, as embedded in part of their data is information on the average length of stay and things like that. So if you're not understanding or collecting the data on the experience side of the equation, you're really missing a boat because it really can inform some other decisions. All of that feeds the economic equation. As you all know, anybody who's done in-plan models is there's visitation and expenditures go in, and then obviously you get an output of what those economic impacts are, both from direct and indirect expenditures as well as employment. And again, most of the federal agencies have some relationship with either their own internal sources or external universities to generate that. Most states do a lot of economic impact analysis, particularly the tourism offices. And then obviously we have folks like Southwick here who works with the Outdoor Industry Association to help look at some economic impacts as well. We tend to, it's very interesting, when we have discussions with our clients, they are particularly focused on the economic impact, which is just a measurement. It's not the only measurement. So, and we are very encouraging of the public agencies to make sure that they have really good data about the direct impacts, which are usually measured through their direct partners on the ground. And then finally, but as importantly, if everything works right, somebody has a positive experience on the federal land. And you know, I don't know the last time I looked on Instagram or Facebook or whatever and saw somebody frowning in an outdoor environment. So really, memories are all about the benefits and the values that people take away from their overall experience. So to us, we need to be tracking that. And before, when I was a little kid, this was reflected in a Christmas card that had a picture of somebody at the Grand Canyon, or in a scrapbook that got yellow and you went back and looked at a picture of. Now, and so you could never get access to it. You would never know what was going on. Now, all you got to do, and we've done it before with our clients, is literally pull stuff from social media feeds to understand your public's impression of your places. So we have a super valuable tool now that could be mined from a data standpoint to help us inform our planning decisions. So with that, I've given a placemat of how we see data being connected. And I will say in closing, before we bring our colleagues up here, that, as I said in opening, if you are making policy decisions in the absence of good data, you really aren't making a good policy decision. And so I cannot encourage you enough to understand how the pieces of the puzzle fit together and understand data aggregation, data synthesis is not cheap. Don probably has to argue every year for the maintenance of his continued MVOM budget, but if you're not talking about things that are based on real data, you're really not having a real discussion. So with that, thanks again, and I guess we're going to bring our colleagues up here.